Some moments define a life. For two police officers in the manicured suburb of Oak Creek, that moment wasn't a heroic shootout or a daring rescue. It was a routine trespassing call on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. They rolled up with the casual authority of men who believed they owned the streets, ready to deal with a supposed vagrant. But they were about to learn a lesson that would echo through the halls of justice. The man they were about to harass, corner, and accuse wasn't a squatter. He was a guardian of the nation's laws, and he had come home. This is the story of how a quiet street became a battleground for civil rights, and how two badges learned that the man they saw as a threat was in fact the very authority they should have feared. The sun was high and forgiving, casting a warm golden glow over the tranquil streets of Oak Creek, Virginia. It was the kind of neighborhood that appeared in brochures for a better life, where manicured lawns met perfectly paved sidewalks, and the only disturbance was the gentle hum of a distant lawnmower. For Dr. Elias Vance, the warmth of the sun felt like a welcome home, a stark contrast to the sterile, climate-controlled offices of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit in Quantico he had inhabited for the past 2 decades. He stood on the porch of the colonial-style house on Sycamore Lane, a crowbar in his gloved hand. He wasn't Special Agent Vance today, the man who could deconstruct a psychopath's mind from a few scattered case files. He was just Elias, the son of Eleanor and James Vance, standing on the porch they had built with love and savings. The house had been empty since his mother passed 2 years ago, a silent monument to a life well lived. Now, with his retirement on the horizon, Elias had decided to reclaim it, to strip it back to its bones and rebuild it, not just as a house, but as a home for his own future. He wore old, paint-splattered jeans and a gray t-shirt darkened with sweat across his back and chest. A thick beard, flecked with distinguished gray, covered the lower half of his face, a luxury he rarely afforded himself during his buttoned-down professional life. He was a tall, powerfully built man, and the physical labor of prying away rotting porch boards was a satisfying release, a tangible problem he could solve with his hands instead of his mind. Each splintered plank he removed was an act of excavation, uncovering memories of scraped knees, summer barbecues, and his father teaching him how to throw a baseball in the sprawling backyard. From across the street, behind the pristine bay window of her own immaculate colonial, Carol Peterson watched. She held a porcelain teacup, her knuckles white. She had lived on Sycamore Lane for 30 years and considered herself the unofficial guardian of its character, and more importantly, its property values. She hadn't known the Vances well. They were a quiet, dignified black family in a predominantly white neighborhood, and in her mind, that had made them an acceptable anomaly. But this man, he didn't fit. He'd been there for 3 days, arriving in a dusty Ford F-150, not the polished sedan she was used to. He worked from sunup to sundown, his presence a jarring note in the neighborhood's placid symphony. He looked rough, disheveled. To Carol, he looked like a squatter, a vagrant who had found an empty house and decided to take it over. The possibility that he could be the Vance's son, a man of considerable stature and importance, never once crossed the carefully curated landscape of her mind. She had called the Homeowners Association yesterday. They had no record of a new owner. She had looked up the property records online. It was still listed under the Vance Family Trust. That was all the confirmation she needed. "He's been prying boards off the porch all morning," she said into her phone, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "It's blatant destruction of property. Yes, the house has been empty for 2 years. He's clearly a drifter who broke in. He's a big guy. He looks intimidating." She let the word hang in the air, weighted with all its unspoken implications. "You need to send someone, now, before he does more damage or starts casing our houses." She hung up, a frisson of self-righteous satisfaction running through her. She was protecting her community. She was doing the right thing. Elias, oblivious to the judgment being passed from across the street, paused his work. He wiped a bead of sweat from his brow with the back of his glove and surveyed his progress. He felt a deep sense of peace here, a connection to his roots that had been frayed by years of confronting the darkest aspects of humanity. Here there were no monsters hiding in the shadows. There was only wood, nails, and the promise of renewal. He heard the distant wail of a siren and thought nothing of it. It was a common sound, even in a neighborhood as quiet as Oak Creek. He turned his attention back to a particularly stubborn board, leveraging the crowbar until it finally groaned and gave way. He was so focused, so lost in the rhythm of his work and the warmth of his memories, that he didn't notice the black and white cruiser until it had already pulled up to his curb, its tires making a soft crunching sound on the gravel shoulder. The gentle hum of the neighborhood had just been broken. The doors of the Oak Creek Police Department cruiser opened with a practiced metallic click. The first officer out was Kyler Miller. He was a man in his late 40s with a military-style buzz cut and a face that seemed permanently set in a sneer of mild disapproval. He had been on the force for 20 years and carried himself with the heavy swagger of someone who believed his badge gave him infallible judgment. His partner, Jake Schmidt, was younger, barely 5 years on the job, with a nervous energy that he tried to conceal behind a stoic mask. He saw Miller not just as a senior partner, but as a mentor, and he mirrored his movements and attitudes with a near-subconscious loyalty. Miller's eyes swept over the scene, the dusty pickup truck, the pile of old wood on the lawn, and the large black man in sweat-soaked clothes standing on the porch. His brain, conditioned by 2 decades of confirmation bias, processed the image and delivered a swift, simple verdict. Carol Peterson was right. Trouble. Well, what do we have here?" Miller said, his voice loud enough to carry across the lawn, dripping with condescension. He didn't unclip his holster, but his hand rested casually on the butt of his Glock, a subtle gesture of dominance. Elias Vance turned slowly, the crowbar still in his hand. His profiler's mind instantly kicked in, overriding the simple annoyance of being interrupted. He cataloged everything in a fraction of a second. Officer Miller, alpha male, confrontational posture, seeks to establish control immediately. Officer Schmidt, beta, follows lead, visibly less confident, eyes darting nervously. This is a dominance play from the start. He placed the crowbar deliberately on the porch floor, making sure the movement was slow and non-threatening. He raised his empty gloved hands slightly. "Good afternoon, officers. Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice calm and even, a trained instrument of de-escalation. "That's what we're here to find out," Miller retorted, stopping at the edge of the lawn. Schmidt flanked him a few feet to the right. "We got a call about a suspicious individual trespassing and vandalizing this property." Elias felt a familiar, weary tightening in his chest. He had worn a suit and tie for so long, had commanded rooms full of agents, had briefed generals and politicians. But here, in his own front yard, in old clothes, he was just a suspicious individual. "There must be a misunderstanding," Elias said, keeping his tone polite but firm. "This is my property. I'm renovating it." Miller let out a short, incredulous laugh. It wasn't a laugh of humor. It was a tool of dismissal. "Your property? That's a good one. We know for a fact this house has been vacant for 2 years. Belongs to the Vance family." "That's correct," Elias said, his patience beginning to fray at the edges. "My name is Elias Vance. This was my parents' home." Miller exchanged a look with Schmidt, a smirk playing on his lips. "Sure it is, buddy. And I'm the King of England. You got any ID on you that says Vance?" This was the critical juncture. Elias knew it. He could comply, but his wallet, with his driver's license and his far more important federal credentials, was inside the house, sitting on the kitchen counter. Asking to retrieve it could be seen as a move to flee or arm himself. It was a tactical problem. "My wallet is inside on the kitchen counter," Elias explained. "If you'll allow me to retrieve it, I can clear this all up in a moment." Miller's eyes narrowed. The sneer hardened. "I don't think so. You're not going anywhere. You're going to stay right where you are, on that porch, and you're going to answer my questions. What are you really doing here? Casing the neighborhood? Looking for copper pipes to strip?" The accusation was so nakedly prejudiced, it was almost a caricature. Elias felt a surge of hot anger, the kind he hadn't felt in years. It was the primal rage of being unjustly accused, of being seen not as a man, but as a stereotype. But his training was a formidable dam. He held the anger back, keeping his voice steady. "Officer," he said, his tone dropping slightly, losing its gentle edge and gaining a core of steel. "I am the legal owner of this residence. I am not trespassing, and I am not a thief. I am telling you my identification is inside. We can resolve this peacefully right now. You see, Jake? Miller said to his partner, completely ignoring Elias. This is what they do. They argue. They try to talk their way out of it. They think they're smarter than you. He turned his full attention back to Elias, taking a step onto the lawn, closing the distance. I'm done asking nicely. Put your hands on your head. You're being detained for suspicion of trespassing and criminal mischief. Schmidt, taking his cue, moved to the side, his hand now formally resting on his weapon. The suburban quiet was gone, replaced by a tense, humming silence, broken only by the chirping of a distant bird, oblivious to the drama unfolding on Sycamore Lane. The welcome mat had been pulled out from under Elias Vance, and in its place was the cold, hard reality of a confrontation he hadn't sought, but was now fully prepared to finish. The air on the porch grew thick and heavy. For Elias Vance, time seemed to slow down, each second stretching into a distinct, analyzable moment. He was no stranger to high-stakes confrontations, but those had been in dark alleys, hunting serial killers, or intense interrogation rooms breaking down suspects. This was different. This was a violation of a sacred space, his own home. The indignity of it was a sharp, metallic taste in his mouth. I'm going to say this one last time, officer, Elias stated, his voice now devoid of any warmth. It was the voice he used at Quantico, a voice that commanded attention and conveyed absolute seriousness. I am not a suspect. I own this house. You are making a grave mistake. Officer Miller saw this not as a warning, but as a challenge to his authority. In his world, compliance was non-negotiable, especially from someone who fit his preconceived profile of a criminal. Mistake? Miller scoffed, stepping onto the first porch step, his boots making a loud thud on the wood. He was now in Elias's personal space. The only mistake here was yours, thinking you could set up shop in a neighborhood like this and not get noticed. Hands on your head, now, or I will put them there for you. Elias stood his ground. He didn't move. It was a calculated risk. To comply would be to accept the role of a criminal. To resist would invite violence. But to simply stand, calm and resolute, was a form of defiance Miller was not equipped to handle. It was passive resistance, a tactic that often enraged aggressors, looking for an excuse to escalate. It worked. Miller's face flushed a deep, angry red. That's it. You want to do this the hard way? He lunged forward, grabbing Elias's left arm with surprising speed. Turn around, he barked, trying to wrench the arm behind Elias's back. But Elias Vance was not an easy man to move. Years of FBI defensive tactics training were ingrained in his muscle memory. Without thinking, his body reacted. He didn't strike back. He simply shifted his weight, using Miller's own momentum against him. He pivoted, breaking the grip easily and creating space between them. It was a fluid, economical movement, the kind that spoke of years of practice. The move shocked Miller. He had expected a clumsy, untrained man, not someone who could effortlessly neutralize his hold. For a split second, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face before being replaced by even greater fury. He saw it as resisting arrest. He's resisting! Miller shouted to Schmidt, who was now fumbling to unclip his taser. Light him up, Jake! Elias saw Schmidt raising the bright yellow weapon. He knew he had only seconds before the situation spiraled completely out of control. The anger he had been suppressing finally boiled over, not as rage, but as cold, decisive action. De-escalation had failed. Reason had failed. Now only the truth, delivered with the full weight of his authority, would suffice. He raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, but it was a feint. His posture remained tall and commanding. He looked past the furious Miller and locked eyes with the nervous, hesitant Schmidt. Officer Schmidt, stand down, he ordered. His voice was a thunderclap in the quiet afternoon. It wasn't a request. It was a direct command from a superior. The tone was so utterly unexpected, so filled with innate authority, that Schmidt actually froze, his finger hovering over the taser's trigger. Miller, incensed by this audacity, lunged again. This time Elias didn't just parry. He moved with blinding speed, grabbing Miller's wrist and applying a precise pressure point lock. Miller gasped as a jolt of sharp, debilitating pain shot up his arm. He was immobilized, his arm locked in an iron grip. Still holding the officer, Elias looked directly into Miller's eyes, his face a mask of cold fury. "My name," he said, his voice low and guttural, each word a perfectly cut diamond of ice, "is Special Agent Dr. Elias Vance. My badge and credentials for the Federal Bureau of Investigation are in my wallet on the kitchen counter. You, Officer Miller, have just assaulted a federal officer on his own property." Silence, the world seemed to stop. The chirping bird fell quiet. The hum of the lawnmower was gone. Miller's face, contorted in pain, was now slack with utter, dumbfounded disbelief. He stared at Elias, searching for a lie, a bluff, anything to make sense of what he had just heard. He saw nothing but the unwavering conviction of a man who was telling the absolute truth. Schmidt, his taser still half raised, looked from his partner's shocked face to the powerful, composed man holding him. FBI? The letters seemed to hang in the air, alien and terrifying. They had been called to a simple trespassing. How had it come to this? Elias maintained the hold for a moment longer, letting the weight of his statement sink in. Then, with a deliberate, almost dismissive motion, he released Miller's wrist. The older officer stumbled back, cradling his arm, his face a canvas of confusion, humiliation, and a dawning, sickening sense of fear. The power dynamic on the porch hadn't just shifted, it had been shattered and remade. The authority they thought they had was an illusion, and they had just aimed it at the one man in the neighborhood they absolutely shouldn't have. The aftermath of Elias's declaration was a thick, ringing silence. Officer Miller rubbed his wrist, his face cycling through a kaleidoscope of emotions. Disbelief, anger, and the cold, creeping dread of a man who has just walked off a cliff and has yet to hit the ground. Officer Schmidt stood frozen, the taser now feeling impossibly heavy in his hand. "FBI," Miller finally stammered, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. He was trying to reassert his bravado, but it came out as a weak, pathetic squeak. "You're lying. You think saying that makes a difference? You're a trespasser resisting arrest." Elias looked at him with something bordering on pity. "Officer, your hole is deep enough. I suggest you stop digging." He then turned his gaze to the younger, more visibly shaken officer. "Officer Schmidt, you have your radio, you have a dispatcher. I am going to give you my FBI identification number from memory. I want you to run it. Right now." He recited a 9-digit number, clear and precise. "The name is Special Agent Elias Vance, Behavioral Analysis Unit, Quantico. Ask your dispatcher to confirm my status with the Bureau's Washington field office." Miller wanted to interrupt, to scream, to maintain control, but the specificity of the information, the ID number, the unit, the field office, was like a series of body blows. Bluffs weren't usually this detailed. Schmidt, looking at Miller for guidance and receiving only a confused glare, made a decision. With a trembling hand, he raised his radio to his mouth. "Dispatch, this is 3 Adam 15. I need a status check. I have a party on scene claiming federal status." He relayed the name and number Elias had provided. The radio crackled back a moment later. 10-4, 3 Adam 15, stand by." The wait was excruciating. It couldn't have been more than 60 seconds, but on the porch of the colonial house on Sycamore Lane, it felt like an eternity. Miller paced in a small, tight circle on the lawn, muttering under his breath. Elias stood perfectly still, a statue of patience, his arms crossed over his chest. He was projecting calm, but inside a cold, controlled fury was solidifying. The violation was complete. Now the consequences would begin. Then the radio squawked to life, and the dispatcher's voice was different. The professional monotone was gone, replaced by a tone of high-pitched urgency. 3 Adam 15. Be advised, subject is confirmed. I repeat, confirmed active special agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Supervisory rank. Dispatch is receiving a priority call from the Washington field office on the main line right now. They're asking for your unit commander's direct cell number. Sir, you need to confirm your situation. The word sir was the final nail in the coffin. Dispatchers didn't call patrol officers sir. Schmidt's face went white. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. He lowered the radio, his hand shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He looked at Miller, his eyes wide with panic. "Kyler, it's real. He's real." Miller froze. The world tilted on its axis. Every decision he had made in the last 10 minutes replayed in his mind, but now they were cast in a horrifying new light. The condescending tone, the buddy and pal, the accusations of theft, the physical assault, the order to tase a federal agent, his body cam footage. Oh God, the body cam footage. It had captured everything. He looked up at Elias Vance, and for the first time, he didn't see a black man in dirty clothes. He saw a man of immense power and authority, a man who operated in a world of justice far above his own, a man he had just illegally detained and assaulted. The sneer was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure, unadulterated fear. Elias uncrossed his arms. His demeanor had changed. He was no longer a homeowner being harassed. He was now officially on the job. "Officers Miller and Schmidt," he said, and the use of their names was sharp and clinical. "You are to remain on the scene until a supervisor from your department arrives. You will not turn off your body cameras. You will not speak to each other about the incident. You will surrender your firearms to me for safekeeping until your supervisor is present." It was an order that fell outside standard procedure, but in that moment, it was unquestionable. It was a tactical move to completely disarm them, both literally and figuratively. Schmidt, looking like a scared kid, immediately unholstered his weapon, holding it by the grip, but first towards Elias. He was done. He wanted no more of this. Miller hesitated, a last flicker of his shattered pride resisting. You can't do that." Elias took a step toward him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "I can, and I will. Or your next conversation will be with a U.S. attorney about violations of 18 U.S. Code Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law, a felony that carries a sentence of 10 years in federal prison. Now give me your weapon, officer." The legal code, quoted verbatim, was the final blow. Miller's resistance crumbled into dust. Defeated, humiliated, and terrified, he unholstered his Glock and handed it over. Elias Vance now stood on his family's porch, holding 2 police-issue firearms, looking down at the 2 local cops who had tried to arrest him for trespassing. Across the street, Carol Peterson watched from her window, confused. The situation didn't look like an arrest anymore. It looked like a surrender. The arrival of Sergeant Bill Henderson, Miller and Schmidt's supervisor, was a study in controlled chaos. He pulled up in his patrol SUV, lights flashing but siren off, his face etched with the grimace of a man who'd been pulled from a mountain of paperwork to deal with a ticking bomb. The dispatcher had only said, "Incident involving a federal officer," but the frantic tone told him everything he needed to know. This was bad. He found an almost surreal scene. 2 of his officers, Miller and Schmidt, were standing stiffly on the lawn, disarmed and pale. And on the porch stood Elias Vance, holding their service weapons with a casual but secure grip, his expression unreadable. "What in God's name is going on here?" Henderson demanded, his eyes darting between his men and the imposing figure on the porch. "Sergeant," Elias said, his voice calm, cutting through the tension, "I am Special Agent Elias Vance, FBI. Your officers were responding to a trespassing call at my residence. An altercation occurred in which I was unlawfully detained and assaulted. Their firearms have been secured for everyone's safety." Henderson felt a migraine begin to blossom behind his eyes. He recognized the name Vance, the old couple who used to live here. It all clicked into place with a sickening thud. "My wallet is just inside the front door," Elias continued. "I suggest you retrieve it, verify my credentials, and then we can have a productive conversation. Your officers will remain silent." Nodding grimly, Henderson did as he was told. He returned a moment later, holding the wallet open. He stared at the golden badge and the crisp official photo ID. Supervisory Special Agent, Behavioral Analysis Unit. He felt his stomach clench. This wasn't just some field agent. This was a senior profiler from the legendary BAU. These were the guys who hunted the monsters. And Miller had just tried to arrest one for pulling up his own floorboards. "Agent Vance, Dr. Vance." "Sir," Henderson stammered, "I cannot begin to apologize." "Don't," Elias cut him off, not unkindly. "Apologies are for later. Right now, we deal with the situation. Your officers need to be removed from this property. A formal complaint will be filed. Just then, Elias's cell phone, which he'd left on the porch railing, began to ring. The caller ID flashed a name that made Henderson's blood run cold. SAC Isabella Rossi, special agent in charge of the Washington field office. The storm had just made landfall. Elias answered, his tone shifting from authoritative to professionally deferential. Rossi. The voice on the other end was audible even from a few feet away, sharp, powerful, and utterly devoid of amusement. Elias, I just got a call from OPR, who got a call from some terrified police dispatcher in Virginia. They said 2 local cops tried to tase you. Tell me what's happening right now. Elias calmly recounted the events of the last 20 minutes, his description sparse, factual, and damning. The situation is under control. The officers have been disarmed. Their supervisor is on site. Good, Rossi's voice crackled. Do not give them their weapons back. I want their names, badge numbers, and a direct line to their chief of police. An investigative team from my office in the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division is being assembled as we speak. They will be there within 2 hours. Do you require medical attention, Elias? Negative. I'm fine. All right, secure the scene. Do not let those officers leave until our people get there. I want them sequestered. And Elias, I am so sorry this happened to you. It's not your fault, Isabella, he said, and hung up. He turned back to the now petrified Sergeant Henderson. Your chief of police is Robert Davies, correct? My SAC will be contacting him shortly. Officers Miller and Schmidt are now part of a federal investigation. They are not to leave. They are to be placed in separate vehicles and are not to communicate. Henderson could only nod, his mind reeling. DOJ Civil Rights Division. This had escalated from a departmental headache to a full-blown federal crisis in the span of a single phone call. He escorted Miller and Schmidt, now ashen-faced and silent, to his SUV. Miller shot a look at Elias, a toxic cocktail of hate, fear, and disbelief. He had been the king of his small kingdom for 20 years, and in 20 minutes, his kingdom had been burned to the ground by a man he had mistaken for a vagrant. As Henderson secured his officers, another car pulled up. It was a sleek black sedan. A woman in a sharp business suit stepped out. Amelia Hayes, a civil rights attorney, and an old friend Elias had called just before Rossi. He'd left a simple, urgent voicemail. She had clearly gotten it. She walked up to the porch, her eyes taking in the scene with a practiced, analytical gaze. Elias, she said, her voice low. Your message sounded interesting. Looks like I underestimated. Amelia, he replied, a grim smile touching his lips for the first time that day. Thanks for coming. It seems I have a bit of a legal situation here. He gestured towards the police cars. Meet the welcoming committee. The pieces were now in motion. The institutional gears of the FBI and the Department of Justice were beginning to grind, their full weight preparing to descend upon the small Oak Creek Police Department. The storm Elias Vance had weathered alone was over. Now the hurricane was on its way. The next 48 hours were a blur of methodical, relentless action. The arrival of the team from the Washington field office was like a scene from a movie. 4 agents in dark suits descended upon Sycamore Lane, their demeanor a stark contrast to the small-town vibe of the Oak Creek PD. They moved with quiet, intimidating efficiency, directed by a senior agent named David Chen, who reported directly to SAC Rossi. Their first act was to take possession of the body cam footage from Miller and Schmidt. Chief Robert Davies of the Oak Creek PD, a portly man just 2 years from retirement, had initially tried to handle it internally. He'd called Elias personally, offering a profuse, fumbling apology and promising a thorough and transparent internal investigation. With all due respect, Chief Davies, Elias had replied coolly over the phone, transparency is no longer optional. The footage is now evidence in a federal inquiry. My attorney, Amelia Hayes, will be in touch. Davies watched the unedited footage in his office, his stomach churning with each passing second. It was worse than he could have imagined. Miller's overt, sneering racism was on full display. His escalating aggression, his dismissal of every attempt Elias made to reason with him, his outright lies about Elias resisting. It was a textbook case of police misconduct. Schmidt was no better. His complicity, his failure to intervene, his eagerness to deploy his taser on his partner's illegal command, it was all there, captured by the unblinking eye of the camera. The video didn't just show a mistake, it documented a crime. The karma for officers Miller and Schmidt began to grind them down with terrifying speed. They were placed on immediate, unpaid administrative leave. The department, under pressure from the city's lawyers who were already panicking about the impending lawsuit, confiscated their badges and service weapons. The local police union put up an initial blustering defense, but once their representatives saw the body cam footage, their support became noticeably tepid. "This is indefensible," the union rep told Miller in a hushed, angry tone. "What were you thinking, Kyler? You assaulted an FBI agent on his own property. There's no spin for this." But the professional consequences were only the beginning. The story inevitably leaked. A clerk in the city manager's office with a cousin at the local news station made a phone call. The headline on the evening news was explosive. Oak Creek officers under federal investigation after confrontation with decorated FBI profiler. The public fallout was immediate and brutal. The Oak Creek Police Department was inundated with calls from angry citizens. National news outlets picked up the story. Suddenly, the quiet, affluent suburb was the latest flashpoint in the ongoing national debate about policing and race. Protesters began to gather peacefully outside the police station, holding signs that read, "Badges aren't shields," and "Justice for Dr. Vance." For Carol Peterson, the woman who had made the initial call, the karmic blow was more personal. Two FBI agents, a man and a woman in crisp suits, knocked on her door. They weren't aggressive. They didn't need to be. They simply sat in her immaculate living room and asked her to recount her 911 call. They played the recording for her. "He looks intimidating," her own voice echoed in the silent room. "Mrs. Peterson," the female agent asked, her voice neutral, "what specifically did you find intimidating about Dr. Vance?" Carol stammered, unable to articulate an answer that wasn't rooted in pure prejudice. "Well, he was a large man, and his clothes, the way he was tearing at the house. He was renovating his own home," the agent stated flatly. "Did he ever look at you? Threaten you? Did he do anything at all besides manual labor on his own property?" Carol had to admit that he hadn't. The agents took her statement, thanked her for her time, and left. But her comfortable world was shattered. Her neighbors who had seen the news now looked at her differently. The whispers followed her when she checked her mail. She was the woman who had sicked the police on a decorated FBI agent because he was black. Her role as the neighborhood's guardian had been exposed for what it was, the ugly, petty tyranny of prejudice. The shame was a heavier burden than any legal penalty. Meanwhile, Amelia Hayes, Elias's attorney, filed a civil rights lawsuit against the city of Oak Creek, the police department, and officers Kyler Miller and Jake Schmidt personally. The suit was a masterwork of legal devastation, citing not only the events on the porch, but also a documented history of disproportionate stops and arrests of minorities by Officer Miller. Records the FBI had subpoenaed and provided. The system that Miller and Schmidt had weaponized for so long was now turning its full, formidable power back on them. Their careers were over. Their reputations were in ruins. And the federal government, represented by the man they had tried to arrest, was just getting started. The conference room at the Oak Creek Municipal Building was aggressively bland. A soulless space of beige walls, a long, polished mahogany table, and institutional-grade carpeting. It was a room designed for budget meetings and zoning disputes. Yet today it was the stage for a career execution. The air was thick with a tension that the humming air conditioning unit couldn't dissipate. At the head of the table sat Police Chief Robert Davies, his face a mask of weary resignation. Flanking him were two city council members and a stern-faced internal affairs captain, forming the disciplinary board. Kyler Miller and Jake Schmidt sat on one side of the table, accompanied by a beleaguered police union representative who looked as if he'd rather be anywhere else. Miller was attempting a facade of indignant resolve, his back ramrod straight, his jaw clenched. But a frantic, hunted look in his eyes betrayed his terror. He was a man clinging to the wreckage of his life, trying to pretend he was still the captain of the ship. In stark contrast, Jake Schmidt was a portrait of defeat. He was slumped in his chair, his gaze fixed on the swirling patterns of the wood grain on the table, his complexion a sickly, pale gray. He looked like a man who had already accepted his fate and was simply waiting for the axe to fall. On the opposite side sat Dr. Elias Vance and his attorney, Amelia Hayes. Elias was the picture of calm authority. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that fit his powerful frame perfectly, a silent testament to the professional world Miller had refused to see. He wasn't there for vengeance. His profiler's mind saw this proceeding not as an act of retribution, but as a necessary, if unpleasant, variable in a much larger equation of institutional change. He was there for accountability. Amelia sat beside him, a leather-bound legal portfolio open before her posture radiating a sharp predatory focus. She was here for justice, and she intended to get it. Chief Davies cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "This hearing is now in session," he began, his voice heavy. "We are here to review the events of August 12th concerning the conduct of Officer Kyler Miller and Officer Jake Schmidt. The primary evidence to be reviewed is the body camera footage from both officers. We will now play that footage, unedited." A technician dimmed the lights and a large screen at the end of the room flickered to life. The footage began, jerky at first, showing the view from Miller's chest. The idyllic, sun-drenched street, the casual, condescending conversation with Schmidt in the car. Then the approach. The room was utterly silent as they watched the scene unfold. Miller's voice, amplified by the speakers, filled the space with its sneering arrogance. "Well, what do we have here?" The board members watched Elias, on screen, remain calm and composed, his voice a model of reason. They saw Miller dismiss every explanation, his prejudice dripping from every word. "Sure it is, buddy, and I'm the King of England." A councilwoman visibly flinched when the on-screen Miller barked, "You're going to answer my questions. What are you really doing here? Casing the neighborhood? Looking for copper pipes to strip?" In the sterile quiet of the hearing room, the naked racism of the accusation was horrifyingly stark. The escalation was even worse to witness. When Miller lunged for Elias's arm, the union representative squeezed his eyes shut for a moment. The fluid defensive motion from Elias was clearly not an act of aggression, yet they heard Miller shout, "He's resisting! Light him up, Jake!" The camera swung wildly, capturing a glimpse of Schmidt fumbling for his taser. Then came the climax. The board watched, mesmerized, as the man they had only seen in work clothes on screen, the vagrant, immobilized a sworn police officer with practiced ease. And then his voice, a low, powerful growl that seemed to make the very air in the room vibrate. "My name is Special Agent Dr. Elias Vance. My badge and credentials for the Federal Bureau of Investigation are in my wallet on the kitchen counter. You, Officer Miller, have just assaulted a federal officer on his own property." The video continued, capturing the stunned silence, the frantic radio call, and the dispatcher's terrified confirmation. When the footage finally ended and the lights came up, the atmosphere in the room had changed. It was no longer a hearing, it was a sentencing. Chief Davies, his face ashen, turned to Miller. "Officer Miller, do you have any statement to make in your defense?" Miller stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He shuffled some papers, a desperate attempt to project professionalism. "With all due respect, Chief, that video doesn't show the full context," he began, his voice strained. "I was responding to a call from a concerned citizen. The subject was non-compliant with verbal commands. He was a large, physically imposing man, and his refusal to cooperate led me to believe he posed a potential threat to officer safety. My actions were consistent with my training to control the situation." Amelia Hayes let a beat of silence pass before she spoke, her voice dangerously soft. "Officer Miller, at what precise moment did Dr. Vance threaten you?" "His non-compliance was a threat," Miller insisted. "He refused to show me his hands." The video shows Dr. Vance placing his crowbar on the floor and raising his empty, gloved hands, Amelia countered, her tone sharpening. He then calmly explained that his identification was inside the house. "Is it standard procedure to interpret a calm, verbal explanation as a threat?" He took a challenging posture. "He stood still, officer," Amelia cut him off, "on his own porch. Let me ask you this. When you first arrived, what did you see? I saw a potential trespasser vandalizing a vacant property. No, Amelia said, leaning forward. What did you see? Did you see a man or did you see a black man in a place you didn't think he belonged? Did you run his license plate? Did you attempt to contact the owners listed on the property records before escalating? You did none of those things. You saw his skin color, you saw his old clothes, and you made an assumption. An assumption you were willing to enforce with a taser and an arrest. Isn't that the truth? Miller sputtered, his face flushing a blotchy red. I am not a racist. Your actions on that video say otherwise, Amelia concluded, sitting back with an air of finality. When it was Schmidt's turn, he didn't even stand. He spoke to the table, his voice a hoarse whisper. I have no excuse. I was following my FTO, my senior officer. I knew it felt wrong. When he started getting loud, I should have stepped in. When he told me to get my taser, I should have refused, but I didn't. I was afraid of questioning him. I failed my duty to the public and to the badge. I am sorry. He finally looked up, his eyes swimming with tears, and looked directly at Elias. I'm sorry, sir. Elias met his gaze and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was not forgiveness, but an acknowledgement of the confession. Chief Davies asked Elias if he wished to make a statement. Elias stood, his presence commanding the room. He didn't look at the disgraced officers. He addressed the board. For 22 years, I have worked for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I have hunted the worst of humanity. I have trusted my life to my fellow officers from local, state, and federal agencies. That trust is the thin line that separates order from chaos. What happened on my porch was not a simple mistake. It was a catastrophic failure of training, professionalism, and basic human decency. Officer Miller did not act as a peacekeeper. He acted as an occupying force. Officer Schmidt did not act as a partner. He acted as a silent accomplice. They did not de-escalate. They provoked. They did not investigate. They accused. This isn't about me. I have the resources and the standing to fight this. This is about the person who doesn't. The person whose name isn't followed by a federal title. Your decision today isn't just about terminating 2 officers. It is about affirming whether the badge in Oak Creek is a symbol of protection for all its citizens or a weapon to be used against some of them. He sat down. The silence that followed was absolute. The board didn't even confer for long. They filed out and returned in less than 10 minutes. Chief Davies read from a prepared statement, his voice devoid of emotion. Based on the irrefutable evidence presented, the board finds that Officer Kyler Miller and Officer Jake Schmidt have violated departmental policies on use of force, conduct unbecoming, and dereliction of duty. Their actions have brought discredit upon this department and have irrevocably broken the public trust. Effective immediately, your employment with the Oak Creek Police Department is terminated. The finality of the words hit Miller like a physical blow. He slammed his fist on the table. You're throwing away 20 years of service. 20 years, he roared, his face contorted in a mask of rage and disbelief. For one misunderstanding. Kyler, sit down, the union rep hissed, pulling at his arm. But Miller was beyond reason. He was a cornered animal. It was Sergeant Henderson, who had been standing by the door, who stepped forward and firmly escorted a shouting, protesting Kyler Miller from the room and from his life as a police officer. Schmidt simply stood, gave a final, broken look at Elias, and walked out, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. The hearing was over, but the reckoning was not. 3 weeks later, the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia unsealed a federal indictment. Citing the video evidence and Schmidt's cooperative testimony, a grand jury had indicted Kyler Miller for violating 18 U.S.C. Warp 242, the willful deprivation of rights under color of law. Facing a jury that would see the video, Miller pleaded guilty. At his sentencing, the judge was scathing. You disgraced the badge you wore, she said, her voice ringing with contempt. You became the very thing you swore to protect us from. He was sentenced to 18 months in a federal penitentiary. The civil lawsuit was a swift, brutal affair for the city. Their lawyers saw the video and immediately pushed for a settlement. Amelia Hayes was relentless. The city agreed to a $1.5 million payout. In a move that made national headlines, Elias announced the terms. He would personally accept only $1. The remaining $1,499 was placed into a trust, overseen by a third-party civil rights group, to fund mandatory, quarterly implicit bias and de-escalation training for the entire Oak Creek PD, and to create a new, truly independent civilian oversight board with subpoena power. He wasn't just taking their money, he was forcing them to change. The ripple effects continued. Chief Davies, his legacy tarnished, served his last day and retired in quiet disgrace. Across the street from Elias, a for sale sign appeared on Carol Peterson's perfectly manicured lawn. The silent judgment of her neighbors and the shame of knowing she had been the catalyst for the entire ugly affair had become unbearable. Months later, the house on Sycamore Lane stood reborn. The new oak porch was solid under Elias's feet as he rocked gently in a chair his father had once loved. The renovation was complete. The house was no longer just an echo of the past, but a foundation for the future. The violation that had occurred on that very spot had been cleansed, not by paint and wood, but by the relentless, grinding wheels of justice. Karma had come to Oak Creek, not as a mystical force, but in the form of body cameras, federal statutes, and a man who refused to be seen as anything less than what he was. The sun set, casting long shadows across the peaceful lawn, and for the first time since he'd returned, Dr. Elias Vance felt the profound, unshakable peace of being truly, insecurely home. The story of Dr. Elias Vance is a powerful and sobering reminder that prejudice doesn't care about your job title, your accomplishments, or your character. It's a poison that can turn a peaceful afternoon into a battle for one's rights and dignity. But it's also a story of profound accountability. It shows what can happen when a corrupt system collides with an immovable object of integrity and power. The body cam didn't lie, the federal government didn't back down, and the officers who traded their duty to protect for the urge to dominate faced the full consequences of their actions. This wasn't just karma, it was the system for once, working exactly as it should. If this story of justice being served resonated with you, please help us share it. Hit that like button to show your support, share this video with your friends and family to spread the message of accountability, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more true stories that matter. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.